Hello everyone, and welcome back to the channel. Today, we are telling the story of Neil Peart, the legendary drummer and lyricist of Rush, a man many fans called the Professor, not only because of his extraordinary technical skill behind the drum kit, but because of the way he thought, read, wrote, observed, and tried to make sense of life. Neil Peart was not the stereotypical rock star. He was not the man throwing televisions out of hotel windows. He was not chasing the loudest party in every city. He was not obsessed with celebrity gossip, red carpets, or becoming the center of attention. In fact, for a man who helped build one of the most respected rock bands in history, Neil Peart often seemed deeply uncomfortable with fame itself. And that is what makes his story so powerful. Because Neil Peart's life was not just about drums. It was about discipline. It was about art. It was about refusing to waste time. It was about friendship, privacy, grief, survival, reinvention, and the terrifying question every human being eventually faces: how do you keep living when life takes away the people you love most? So do I agree with the idea that Neil Peart was different from almost every other rock star of his generation? Absolutely. But I also believe that calling him different is not enough. Neil Peart was proof that greatness does not always need to be loud off stage. Sometimes the loudest soul is the quietest person in the room. Sometimes the most powerful performer is the one who would rather read a book, ride a motorcycle, write in a journal, or sit alone with his thoughts than play the celebrity game. Before we go deeper, please take a moment to like this video, share it with someone who loves classic rock history, and subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the motivation to keep creating these deeper stories about the people behind the music, not just their fame, but their pain, their courage, their choices, and the legacy they leave behind. Now, let's begin. Neil Peart was born on September 12, 1952, in Canada, and he grew up around the Niagara region. His early life did not look like the beginning of a rock legend. He was not born into a world of record contracts, limousines, or giant arenas. Like many children, he was simply encouraged by his parents to try an instrument. At first, that instrument was piano. But sometimes parents choose one thing, and destiny chooses another. Neil's real instrument announced itself through rhythm. He was the kind of child who did not need a formal drum kit to start becoming a drummer. He could make a rhythm out of furniture, tabletops, chopsticks, or anything else within reach. That is often how a gift first appears. It does not wait for the proper equipment. It does not wait for permission. It leaks out through ordinary objects. At 13, his parents gave him drumsticks, a practice pad, and lessons. They did not immediately buy him a full drum set. Instead, they made him earn it. If he stayed committed for a year, then he could have the drums he wanted. That may seem like a small family story, but it reveals one of the first great lessons of Neil Peart's life: desire must become discipline. Many young people want something intensely for a few weeks. They want to be a musician, an athlete, a writer, a filmmaker, a painter, a dancer. They imagine the final version of success: the applause, the recognition, the feeling of mastery. But discipline asks a harder question: will you still show up when the dream is boring? Will you practice when no one is watching? Will you repeat the same movement until your hands ache? Will you continue after the first excitement fades? Neil did. At 14, he received his first real drum kit. From that point forward, he began performing wherever young musicians could perform: churches, high schools, local bands, small stages. These early places matter. They are not glamorous, but they are where the foundation is built. Before a musician ever stands in front of thousands, he must learn to play for 20 people who may not care. Before he becomes a legend, he must load gear, make mistakes, listen back, improve, and play again. Greatness usually begins in rooms where nobody is impressed yet. Neil Peart's first bands were part of that training. He played around southern Ontario, but eventually small-town Canada began to feel too narrow for the size of his ambition. Like many young dreamers, he looked elsewhere. He decided to go to London, England, believing that a wider world might open wider doors. This is one of the classic turning points in any artist's life: leaving home. Leaving home is not just geography. It is identity. It is saying, I cannot become who I am meant to become if I stay where everyone already knows me. That decision can be exciting, but it is also frightening. The world does not owe a dreamer anything. A new city can make you feel alive one day and invisible the next. In London, Neil found some work as a musician, but not enough to build the life he imagined. He supported himself by selling jewelry on Carnaby Street. Picture that, the future drummer of Rush, the man who would later perform before massive crowds, standing in London trying to make ends meet. It is a humbling image, and it matters because every successful person has a chapter like that, a chapter where the dream looks foolish from the outside. Eventually, Neil realized London was not working. And here is where his story becomes especially human. He did not simply struggle and then immediately become famous. He gave up. Or at least, it looked like he did. He returned to Canada. He went back to the hometown area. He took a job with his father selling tractor parts. For some people, that might sound like failure. But sometimes what looks like failure is really a pause before the next version of your life begins. Neil Peart's return home reminds us that a dream does not always move forward in a straight line. Sometimes it circles back. Sometimes it retreats. Sometimes it sits quietly in a warehouse, a shop, or a family business while the person carrying it wonders whether it is time to let it go. There are people watching this right now who understand that feeling. Maybe you tried something and it did not work. Maybe you moved to a city and came back home. Maybe you started a business, an art project, a channel, a band, or a career path and then had to take an ordinary job. It can feel humiliating. It can feel as if the dream has died. But Neil Peart's story says, do not mistake a setback for the final chapter. Music was not finished with him. He began playing again with local musicians. At first, perhaps it was reluctant. Perhaps it felt like a small return to something he had tried to leave behind. But rhythm has a way of calling its people back. Soon, he heard that a Toronto band needed a new drummer. That band was Rush. At the time, Rush was not yet the global institution it would become. But for a young musician from the Niagara region, auditioning for a Toronto band was a major opportunity. Neil decided to try. The story of his audition has become almost mythic. He arrived in an old Ford Pinto, carrying a less-than-glamorous drum kit packed in garbage bags. He did not arrive looking like the polished rock star image. He looked, in the eyes of Geddy Lee, like a small-town farm boy. His hair was shorter than theirs. His appearance did not scream rock and roll confidence. But then he played, and everything changed. This is another great lesson in Neil Peart's life: appearance may create a first impression, but ability creates the final one. When Neil sat behind the drums, he made the kind of impression that cannot be faked. Geddy Lee later recognized the combination of power and precision. Neil did not simply keep time. He attacked the kit with intelligence, force, and control. He had the rare ability to sound both muscular and exact. He was not just loud. He was articulate. That is one reason drummers admire him so deeply. A great drummer does not merely hit drums. A great drummer speaks through rhythm. Neil Peart's drumming had vocabulary. It had architecture. It had punctuation. It had thought. He joined Rush, but the test was immediate and brutal. He had only about 2 weeks to learn the material before stepping onto a major stage with the band. Imagine the pressure. It is one thing to join a group in a rehearsal room. It is another to walk into a professional tour where everyone is counting on you not to fail. The first performance with Rush placed him before thousands of people. For many musicians, that kind of pressure would crush them. For Neil, it became initiation. He survived the test, and the tour proved that he belonged. But Neil Peart did not become essential to Rush only because he could drum. He also became the band's lyricist. This is one of the most extraordinary parts of his contribution. Rush did not simply gain a drummer, they gained a writer, a thinker, a reader, a philosophical engine. Neil brought words to the band. He brought concepts, stories, questions, and themes. His lyrics would become part of what made Rush unlike almost anyone else in rock. Many rock songs are about love, rebellion, partying, heartbreak, or youth. Rush could write about individual freedom, science fiction, alienation, ambition, suburbia, technology, myth, philosophy, and the inner life of the outsider. That was Neil's influence. He was a drummer who read deeply and wrote seriously. On tour, while other musicians might use downtime for excess, Neil used it for reading, studying, writing, and reflection. That choice shaped the band's identity. Rush became music for people who liked complexity, not only musical complexity, but intellectual complexity. Their first album with Neil, Fly By Night, did well enough to suggest promise. It gave the band momentum and showed that the new lineup had chemistry. Then came Caress of Steel, an album that moved Rush further into progressive rock. The band was excited. The label was not. Many critics and listeners were not. The album struggled. The tour became so difficult that the band gave it a grim nickname. Sales disappointed. The label was unhappy. Rush was at risk. This moment is one of the most important in the story of the band, because it tested their character. When your creative risk fails, what do? Do you retreat? Do you apologize to the market? Do you promise to become more commercial? Do you sand down the strange edges that made you interesting in the first place? Mercury Records reportedly wanted Rush to make something more accessible. The message was clear: stop being so difficult. Give people what sells. That is a moment every artist, entrepreneur, creator, and independent thinker eventually faces. The world says, be less like yourself. Be easier to package. Be safer. Be more profitable. Sometimes the world is right about what will sell. But it is not always right about what will last. Rush responded by making 2112. Neil wrote because he could not remain inside the ruins of his former life. There is something ancient about that response. When human beings suffer, they often walk, travel, wander, make pilgrimages, cross landscapes, seek mountains, deserts, oceans, roads. Distance does not erase pain, but it changes the shape of it. The road gives grief a horizon. Neil later wrote about this journey in Ghost Rider, Travels on the Healing Road. Writing became another form of survival. Just as drumming gave rhythm to energy, writing gave structure to devastation. This is one of the most profound lessons in his life. When pain is too large to solve, sometimes the first task is to give it form. A journal entry. A song. A painting. A conversation. A long drive. A walk. A prayer. A letter never sent. These things do not bring back the dead. They do not make grief fair. But they help the living remain connected to themselves. Neil Peart did not heal quickly. He did not pretend. He did not give interviews about moving on with a forced smile. He entered the wilderness of grief honestly. And slowly, through distance, writing, solitude, and time, something in him began to shift. He later found love again with photographer Carrie Nuttall. They married in 2000. This new relationship did not erase what he had lost. Love after grief is not replacement. It is not a betrayal of the dead. It is proof that the heart, even after being shattered, may still contain rooms that can be opened. Eventually, Neil told Geddy Lee and Alex Lifeson that he was ready to return to Rush. Neil Peart died on January 7, 2020. His family and bandmates announced it days later, asking for privacy and encouraging people who wished to honor him to donate to cancer-related charities. The news hit fans with tremendous force. It is hard to explain the grief people feel for artists they never met. Some dismiss it as strange, but it is not strange at all. Music enters private life. A drummer like Neil Peart may never sit at your kitchen table, but his work may accompany you through years of becoming yourself. His lyrics may give words to things you could not explain. His rhythms may energize you when you feel weak. His discipline may inspire you to take your own craft more seriously. When such an artist dies, people grieve not only the person, but the part of their own life that person helped shape. Critics, musicians, writers, and fans openly wept. Many remembered not only his skill, but the emotional effect of watching him play. There was something overwhelming about his command of the instrument. He could make complexity feel inevitable. He could make a massive drum kit feel like a single organism. And what a drum kit it was! Neil's setups were famously enormous, sometimes including dozens of pieces, drums, cymbals, bells, gongs, chimes, and other percussion elements. To a casual viewer, it looked almost impossible. To Neil, it was an expanded vocabulary. Each piece gave him another color, another voice, another way to shape the story of a song. But the size of the kit was not the real point. The real point was what he did with it. A large drum kit in the wrong hands becomes clutter. In Neil Peart's hands, it became architecture. He did not add complexity merely to impress. He built rhythmic structures that served the music. That is why musicians continue to study him. He combined athleticism, intellect, composition, and emotional force. Neil Peart was not simply fast. He was thoughtful. He was not simply technical. He was expressive. He was not simply impressive. He was meaningful. That is the difference between skill and artistry. Skill says, look what I can do. Artistry says, feel what this means. Neil Peart had both. Still, if we reduce him only to drumming, we miss the full human being. He was a reader. A traveler. A writer. A father. A husband. A grieving man. A private man. A friend. A student. A person who tried to remain serious in a world that often rewards shallowness. That may be why his story feels so important now. We live in a time when attention is treated like success. People are encouraged to be constantly visible, constantly available, constantly branding themselves. Neil Peart offers another model. He gave excellence without giving away every part of himself. He understood that privacy is not arrogance. Sometimes privacy is the container that allows depth to survive. Neil Peart's road teaches us that healing is not forgetting. Healing is learning how to carry memory without being crushed every moment by its weight. Healing is not replacing the people we lost. Healing is finding a way to honor them by continuing to live. And sometimes, healing requires movement. For Neil, movement was literal: a motorcycle, open roads, border crossings, landscapes, weather, distance. For someone else, movement might mean therapy, prayer, art, work, service, travel, or simply getting out of bed day after day until the world becomes bearable again. There is no single road through grief. But there must be a road. Neil Peart found his. Another lesson from his life is the value of choosing companions carefully. Rush lasted because Neil, Geddy, and Alex had more than business chemistry. They had trust. When Neil needed to leave, they let him leave. When he returned, they received him. When he needed protection from public questions, they protected him. That is friendship, not the loud, performative kind that exists only in photographs. The real kind. The kind that says, we will not force you to be okay for our convenience. Every person deserves people like that. People who do not make your pain about themselves. People who know when to speak and when to stand guard. People who understand that loyalty sometimes means giving someone space. Rush's legacy is not only musical. It is relational. In a business where so many bands collapse under ego, Rush modeled a rare form of mutual respect. That respect helped their music remain alive for decades. Neil Peart's story also challenges our idea of greatness. We often confuse greatness with visibility. The loudest person appears most important. The most photographed person appears most successful. The person who enjoys fame appears most suited for it. But Neil was great in a quieter way. He did not chase the spotlight beyond the stage. He was not trying to become a celebrity personality. He wanted to do the work. To read. To write. To play. To improve. To travel. To think. That kind of seriousness is deeply inspiring. Because it reminds us that the work matters. Not the noise around the work. The work. The hours. The study. The practice pad. The first drum kit. The failed London chapter. The audition in a Ford Pinto. The 2 weeks of preparation. The risk of 2112. The endless tours. The humiliating jazz lesson. The decision to keep learning. The long road through grief. The return. The final performances. All of it forms the arc of a life built not on image, but on commitment. Neil Peart was never the easiest rock star to understand. But perhaps that is because he was never trying to be a rock star in the shallow sense. He was trying to be a craftsman. A seeker. A writer of rhythms and words. A man who lived inside questions. And that is why people still care. Because beneath the technical genius was something emotionally recognizable, a person trying to make order out of chaos. Is that not what all of us are doing? A drummer turns time into rhythm. A writer turns experience into language. A grieving parent turns unbearable loss into a road forward. A band turns friendship into sound. A life turns pain, discipline, love, and effort into legacy. Neil Peart did all of that. At the end of his life, he left behind more than songs. He left behind a model of artistic integrity. He showed that it is possible to be brilliant without being addicted to fame. He showed that intelligence and rock music can belong together. He showed that technical mastery can carry emotional depth. He showed that privacy can coexist with generosity. He showed that grief can destroy a life and still not erase the possibility of meaning. And perhaps most powerfully, he showed that even after the darkest road, a person can still find a way to play again. People who do not make your pain about themselves. People who know when to speak and when to stand guard. People who understand that loyalty sometimes means giving someone space. Rush's legacy is not only musical. It is relational. In a business where so many bands collapse under ego, Rush modeled a rare form of mutual respect. That respect helped their music remain alive for decades. Neil Peart's story also challenges our idea of greatness. We often confuse greatness with visibility. The loudest person appears most important. The most photographed person appears most successful. The person who enjoys fame appears most suited for it. But Neil was great in a quieter way. He did not chase the spotlight beyond the stage. He was not trying to become a celebrity personality. He wanted to do the work. To read. To write. To play. To improve. To travel. To think. That kind of seriousness is deeply inspiring. Because it reminds us that the work matters. Not the noise around the work. The work. The hours. The study. The practice pad. The first drum kit. The failed London chapter. The audition in a Ford Pinto. The 2 weeks of preparation. The risk of 2112. The endless tours. The humiliating jazz lesson. The decision to keep learning. The long road through grief. The return. The final performances. All of it forms the arc of a life built not on image, but on commitment. Neil Peart was never the easiest rock star to understand. But perhaps that is because he was never trying to be a rock star in the shallow sense. He was trying to be a craftsman. A seeker. A writer of rhythms and words. A man who lived inside questions. And that is why people still care. Because beneath the technical genius was something emotionally recognizable, a person trying to make order out of chaos. Is that not what all of us are doing? A drummer turns time into rhythm. A writer turns experience into language. A grieving parent turns unbearable loss into a road forward. A band turns friendship into sound. A life turns pain, discipline, love, and effort into legacy. Neil Peart did all of that. At the end of his life, he left behind more than songs. He left behind a model of artistic integrity. He showed that it is possible to be brilliant without being addicted to fame. He showed that intelligence and rock music can belong together. He showed that technical mastery can carry emotional depth. He showed that privacy can coexist with generosity. He showed that grief can destroy a life and still not erase the possibility of meaning. And perhaps most powerfully, he showed that even after the darkest road, a person can still find a way to play again.